The dust-laden wind carried Elizabeth Jane Willis through the gates of Presidio, Texas, her wrists bound with rope that cut into her skin as she sat atop a weathered wagon, the indignity of her situation drawing stares from every soul they passed. It was 1875, and at 20 years old, she had never imagined she would become property, sold to cover her mother's gambling debts to the most feared saloon owner in the territory. "Keep your head down, girl," growled Silas Morton, the balding merchant who had purchased her contract from her mother's creditor. "Your pretty face is worth good money, but not if you get ideas about running." Jane swallowed hard, refusing to let tears fall. 3 days ago, she had been helping her mother run their small seamstress shop when the men came. Her mother had disappeared months before, leaving only a note explaining she was seeking fortune in San Francisco. Jane hadn't known about the thousands of dollars her mother had borrowed from Harlan Jackson, the owner of the Red Ace Saloon, using her daughter as collateral. The wagon lurched to a stop before a 2-story building with peeling paint and a sign that read Morton's General Store. Silas climbed down, his heavy boots raising small clouds of dust. "This is your new home," he said, untying her bonds only to grab her arm roughly. "You'll work the store by day, and when I say so, you'll do whatever else I tell you. Your mother's debt to Jackson was substantial, and I paid a pretty penny for you. 5 years of service should cover it." Jane felt her heart sink. 5 years of servitude to this man who looked at her like she was livestock. She had heard whispers of what happened to women sold into such arrangements. "Mr. Morton," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I had no knowledge of my mother's debts. Surely there must be another way." The sharp sting of his hand across her face silenced her. "Your mother's sins are yours to bear now, girl. Get inside before I change my mind about letting you work in the store instead of the saloon." Inside the store, Jane was shown to a small room behind the storage area, little more than a closet with a cot and a wash basin. "You start tomorrow at dawn," Morton said, locking the door behind him. Alone, Jane finally allowed herself to cry, quiet sobs that wouldn't be heard through the thick wooden door. How could her mother have done this to her? What kind of woman used her own daughter as collateral for gambling debts? The next morning, Jane was awoken before sunrise and put to work taking inventory. Morton watched her every move, his small eyes calculating. "You'll need to learn the prices of everything," he said, handing her a long list. "Make a mistake and it comes out of your keep." By midday, Jane's back ached from reaching high shelves and bending to scrub the floors. Morton had her fitted for a plain brown dress that hung loosely on her frame, a stark contrast to the blue cotton dresses she had sewn for herself back home. "A customer is coming in," Morton said sharply. "Smile and be respectful. It's Preston Farley, the cattle rancher from north of town. His business keeps this store afloat." The bell above the door jingled as a tall man ducked to enter. Jane felt her breath catch. Preston Farley was not what she had expected. Unlike the weathered, older ranchers she had seen in town, he appeared to be in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark hair curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and despite the trail dust on his clothes, he carried himself with quiet dignity. "Afternoon, Morton," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Need supplies for the ranch. The usual plus extra coffee. We've got extra hands for the spring roundup." "Of course, Mr. Farley," Morton said, his tone suddenly deferential. "I'll have it ready for your wagon by tomorrow." "Have you met my new assistant? Jane here will be helping you gather what you need today." Preston's eyes found Jane's, and something in them shifted a flicker of concern as he noted the bruise forming on her cheek from Morton's strike the previous day. "Miss," he said with a slight nod, removing his hat. "Pleased to make your acquaintance." "Sir," Jane replied, keeping her eyes down as Morton had instructed. For the next hour, Jane followed Preston around the store, gathering the items on his list. He spoke little, but she could feel his gaze on her occasionally. When Morton stepped outside to speak with the blacksmith, Preston turned to her. "You're new to Presidio," he stated simply, not a question. "Yes, sir." Jane kept her voice low. "And that mark on your face isn't from falling, I'd wager." Jane touched her cheek involuntarily, saying nothing. Preston's jaw tightened. "Morton's not known for his kindness. If you need," the door swung open and Morton returned. Preston stepped away, his expression unreadable once more. "That should be everything, Morton," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "Put it on my account." As Preston turned to leave, he paused beside Jane. "Remember, miss," he said quietly, "in this country, everyone deserves a fair chance." For days afterward, Jane found herself thinking of Preston Farley and his kind eyes. But the reality of her situation gave her little time for daydreams. Morton worked her from dawn until well after dusk. She cooked his meals, cleaned his home above the store, and tended to customers. At night, he locked her in her small room, the key turning with a finality that crushed her spirits. A week passed before Preston returned to the store. This time, he came alone, riding a magnificent chestnut stallion that stomped impatiently outside. "Just picking up a few things," he told Morton, who was counting money at the counter. Jane was restocking shelves when Preston approached her, pretending to examine a shelf of canned goods. "How are you faring?" he asked quietly. "I am managing, Mr. Farley," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Preston," he corrected, "and managing isn't living." Before she could respond, he said, "I've heard talk in town about how Morton acquired you." Jane felt shame wash over her. "Then you know I'm nothing but property now." Preston's hand reached out, almost touching her arm before he thought better of it. "No human being is property, Miss Willis. Not by any law that matters." The way he said it with such certainty made Jane look up at him. In his eyes, she saw not pity but righteous anger. "Morton boasted at the saloon," Preston continued, his voice a low rumble. "Said he bought you to cover your mother's gambling debts. Is that true?" "Yes," Jane whispered. "I didn't know about the debts until they came for me. My mother, she left months ago. I thought we were doing well with our seamstress shop." Preston's expression darkened. "You're not responsible for her mistakes." Those simple words, spoken with such conviction, broke something inside Jane. No one had ever said that to her before, that she wasn't responsible for the chaos her mother left in her wake. "Mr. Farley," Morton called from the counter. "Will there be anything else?" Preston straightened, his expression neutral once more. "Just some tobacco, Morton, and information. I'm looking to hire a cook for the ranch during Roundup. Know anyone suitable?" Morton laughed. "In Presidio. The decent women are all spoken for, and the rest work for Jackson at the saloon." "Pity," Preston said, his eyes briefly meeting Jane's. "A good cook is worth their weight in gold." That night, locked in her room, Jane replayed Preston's words in her mind. "You're not responsible for her mistakes." If only that were true in the eyes of the law and men like Morton. She ran her fingers over the edge of her cot, feeling something unusual. Tucked beneath the thin mattress was a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. With trembling fingers, Jane unfolded it. In a strong, slanted hand was written, "If you seek another path, leave your window unlatched tomorrow night. P.F." Jane's heart hammered in her chest. Was Preston offering her escape? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. If she were caught, the consequences would be severe. But if she stayed, she faced years of servitude to a cruel master who viewed her as nothing more than a possession. The following day, Jane moved through her tasks in a daze. jumping at every sound, certain that Morton could somehow read her thoughts. By evening, she had made her decision. After Morton locked her in, she waited until his heavy footsteps retreated upstairs before moving to the small window. It was barely large enough for her to fit through, but she managed to slide the rusty latch open. Hours passed. Jane sat on her cot, fully dressed, a small bundle of her meager possessions beside her. Had she misunderstood? Was this some cruel joke? Just as doubt began to overwhelm her, a soft tap came at the window. Jane rushed to it, seeing Preston's face in the moonlight. Without a word, he helped her climb through, his strong hands gentle on her waist as he lifted her down. "We have to move quickly," he whispered, leading her to where two horses waited in the shadows. "Morton has friends in town. If they spot us, there'll be trouble." Jane mounted the mare Preston had brought for her, grateful for the riding lessons her father had given her before his death years ago. They rode in silence, keeping to the back alleys until they reached the outskirts of town. Only when Presidio was a cluster of distant lights did Preston slow their pace. "We'll ride through the night," he said. "My ranch is about 20 miles north. We should reach it by dawn." "Why are you helping me?" Jane asked, the question that had burned in her mind since finding his note. Preston was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the steady rhythm of hoofbeats on packed earth. "My sister," he finally said. She found herself in a similar situation years ago in another town. A man claimed she owed him money after my father died, said he'd take it out in service. His voice hardened. "I was away, working a cattle drive. By the time I returned, she was gone, took her own life rather than submit." Jane felt a cold shock run through her. "I'm so sorry. I swore then I'd never stand by while someone suffered that fate if I could help it," Preston said. "When I heard Morton bragging about his new acquisition, I knew I had to do something." "Won't you face trouble for this?" Jane asked. "Legally, he paid for my contract." Preston's profile was stern in the moonlight. "No court in this territory would uphold a contract that amounts to slavery. Besides, Morton won't want the kind of attention a formal complaint would bring. He has too many questionable dealings." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the vast Texas night spreading around them like an endless sea. Jane felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. "What will happen when we reach your ranch?" she asked eventually. "You'll be safe there," Preston assured her. "My foreman's wife, Maria, will see you settled. There's honest work if you want it, cooking, mending, whatever suits your skills. Or you can rest and decide your path forward. The choice will be yours. The choice will be yours." Such simple words, yet they represented a freedom Jane had thought lost forever. Dawn was breaking when they crested a hill, revealing a sprawling ranch nestled in a verdant valley. The main house was modest but well built, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. In the distance, cattle grazed on the spring grass. "Welcome to Farley Ranch," Preston said, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Maria Gonzalez, Preston's housekeeper and the wife of his foreman, greeted them with concern in her dark eyes. "Senor Preston, we were worried when you did not return yesterday," she said, her accent thick but warm. Her gaze fell on Jane, taking in her plain dress and exhausted appearance. Understanding dawned in her expression. "Ah, I see. Come, señorita, you must be tired and hungry." Maria ushered Jane inside, clucking disapprovingly at her thin frame. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of baking bread. Jane couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so immediately welcome. "Sit, sit," Maria insisted, placing a bowl of hearty stew before her. "Eat now, questions later." Preston lingered in the doorway, hat in hand. Maria will see you have everything you need. I need to speak with Miguel about adjusting the guard rotations for a few days, just in case Morton gets ideas. Thank you, Jane said, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Preston's expression softened. There's nothing to repay. Rest now. We'll talk more later. After he left, Maria settled across from Jane, her kind face serious. Senor Preston, he has a good heart, too good sometimes. He takes and strays people and animals alike. Is that what I am, a stray? Jane asked, not offended but curious. Maria patted her hand. No, Nina. You are someone who needed help and he gave it, that is all. She smiled conspiratorially. Though I have not seen him ride out alone at night for any other stray before. Jane felt her cheeks warm. It's not like that, he's just being kind. Of course, Maria agreed, though her eyes twinkled. Now eat, then sleep. Tomorrow is soon enough to decide what comes next. Jane spent her first days at Farley Ranch recovering her strength and helping Maria with household tasks. Preston was often away, overseeing the spring roundup with his men, but when their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite and concerned for her comfort. A week after her arrival, Jane was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching at a gallop. Her heart seized with fear had Morton found her, but it was Miguel Gonzalez, Preston's foreman, riding hard toward the main house. Maria, he called. Venga rapido, Preston's been injured. Jane dropped the wet sheet she was holding and ran toward the house just as Maria emerged. Together they watched as two ranch hands rode in, supporting Preston between them. His face was ashen, his shirt soaked with blood. Bull gored him, one of the hands explained as they carefully helped Preston down. Got him in the side while he was helping a calf. They carried Preston into the house and laid him on his bed. Maria quickly gathered bandages and hot water while Jane stood frozen in the doorway, watching as the men cut away Preston's shirt to reveal a deep, ugly wound in his side. We need the doctor, Miguel said grimly. Jack, ride to town. Town's half a day's ride, the young ranch hand named Jack replied. By the time I get back with Doc Sanders. I can help, Jane said, finding her voice. All eyes turned to her. My father was a physician before he died. I assisted him often. Maria looked at her skeptically. This is not a simple cut, Nina. I know, Jane said, rolling up her sleeves and approaching the bed. But I know how to clean and stitch a wound properly. It may keep infection at bay until the doctor arrives. Miguel and Maria exchanged glances before nodding. Do what you can, Miguel said. I will go for the doctor myself. Jane took a deep breath and set to work. Preston was semi-conscious, groaning in pain as she cleaned the wound with whiskey and hot water. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face above him. Jane, he murmured, should have been more careful. Hush now, she said softly. Save your strength. Working methodically, Jane cleaned the wound, applied a poultice of herbs Maria provided, and began the painstaking process of stitching the torn flesh. Her father had insisted she learn this skill, saying it might save a life someday. How right he had been. Hours passed as Jane worked, her world narrowing to the task at hand. Preston drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling out names she didn't recognize, sometimes lying so still she had to check his breathing. By the time she finished, her back ached and her fingers were cramped, but the wound was neatly closed and Preston's breathing had steadied. You have skilled hands, Maria said quietly, bringing Jane a cup of coffee. Perhaps your father's gift passed to you. Jane shook her head. I just did what needed doing. Night fell with no sign of Miguel returning with the doctor. Jane refused to leave Preston's side, watching anxiously for any sign of fever that might indicate infection. She bathed his forehead with cool cloths and changed his bandages when blood seeped through. In the quiet hours past midnight, Preston awoke fully for the first time, his blue eyes clear as they found hers. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough. "Of course I am," Jane replied, helping him sip water from a cup. "You saved me. Did you think I would abandon you?" A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Not for a moment. How do you feel?" she asked, laying a hand on his forehead to check for fever. "Like I lost an argument with a bull," he said wryly. "Did I imagine it, or were you stitching me up?" "You didn't imagine it. My father taught me." Preston's hand found hers, his grip weak but warm. "Then I owe you my life, it seems." "You owe me nothing," Jane echoed his earlier words. "There is nothing to repay." His eyes held hers for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them before exhaustion claimed him again. Dr. Sanders arrived the following afternoon, examining Preston's wound with grudging approval. "Whoever did this saved his life," he told Maria, unaware that Jane was the one who had performed the surgery. "The stitching is as fine as any I could have done." "It was Miss Willis," Maria said proudly, gesturing to Jane, who stood nearby. "She has a healer's hands." The doctor eyed Jane with new interest. "Is that so? Where did you train, young lady?" "With my father, Dr. Jonathan Willis. He practiced in Dallas before his death." Recognition dawned in the doctor's eyes. "Jonathan Willis. I knew him by reputation. An excellent physician. He would be proud of your work here." The doctor left medicines and instructions, promising to return in a few days to check on his patient. As he was leaving, he paused beside Jane. "Presidio could use another healer," he said thoughtfully. "I'm not getting any younger and the territory keeps growing, if you're interested in furthering your training." "Thank you," Jane said, surprised by the offer. "I'll consider it." In the days that followed, Jane divided her time between her regular chores and tending to Preston. His recovery was steady but slow, giving them ample time to talk. Jane told him about her childhood in Dallas, her father's practice, and her mother's restless nature that had eventually led them to the small town where disaster struck. "My mother was always chasing something: fortune, excitement, a better life," Jane explained one evening as she changed Preston's bandages. "When my father died, she couldn't bear the quiet life we had. That's why we moved west." "And that's when she started gambling?" Preston asked gently. Jane nodded. "I didn't know at first. She would disappear for days, saying she was visiting friends or looking for work. When she returned, she'd have money, new dresses. I should have questioned it more." "You trusted her. That's not a failing, Jane." "When she left for San Francisco, I thought she was finally seeking honest work," Jane continued. "Her note said she would send for me when she was established. I never imagined she had borrowed money using me as collateral." Preston's hand covered hers, stilling her nervous movements. "You're not responsible for her mistakes," he repeated his words from their meeting in the store. "Some people aren't meant for the duties they're given in life. Your mother wasn't meant to be a mother, perhaps." There was such understanding in his voice that Jane felt tears well in her eyes. "I still love her," she admitted, "despite everything." "Of course you do," Preston said. "Love doesn't disappear because someone fails us. It just changes." As Preston's strength returned, Jane began to consider what would come next. The doctor's offer to train under him was tempting a chance to use the skills her father had taught her and build a respectable life. Yet the thought of leaving Farley Ranch, of leaving Preston, filled her with unexpected sadness. One afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after Preston's injury, Jane was reading to him on the porch when the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Miguel, who was repairing a fence nearby, straightened, hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Stay here," Preston said, rising slowly from his chair despite Jane's protests. 3 riders approached the house, and Jane's blood ran cold as she recognized the center figure seal as Morton, his face red with anger or exertion, perhaps both. "Farley," Morton called out, reining his horse to a stop. "I've come for what's mine." Preston stepped off the porch, his movement steady despite his healing wound. "There's nothing of yours here, Morton." "The girl," Morton spat. "Jane Willis. I paid good money for her contract, and you stole her away in the night. That's theft, plain and simple." Jane moved to Preston's side, fear and anger warring within her. "I am not property to be bought and sold," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Morton sneered. "Your mother didn't think so when she took Jackson's money. A debt's a debt, and someone's got to pay it. The law doesn't recognize contracts that amount to indentured servitude," Preston said calmly, "and I doubt you want Sheriff Reed looking too closely at your business dealings." "I don't need the sheriff," Morton said, his hand moving toward the pistol on his hip. "I can settle this matter myself." Miguel had quietly positioned himself to the side, rifle now in hand. Two more ranch hands emerged from the barn, similarly armed. The odds had shifted, and Morton knew it. "Think carefully, Morton," Preston warned. "Is this really worth dying for?" For a tense moment, Jane thought Morton might draw anyway. Then, slowly, his hand moved away from his weapon. "This isn't over, Farley," he said. "A man who doesn't respect property rights won't find many friends in these parts. A man who thinks people are property won't find much sympathy from me," Preston replied evenly. "Now get off my land." Morton spat on the ground before turning his horse. "You haven't heard the last of this," he called over his shoulder as he and his men rode away. When they were gone, Jane released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He'll be back," she said quietly. Preston nodded, his face grim. "Probably, but not alone next time. We'll need to be prepared." That evening, after the ranch hands had been alerted to keep watch, Jane found Preston in his study, poring over papers. "You shouldn't have to deal with this," she said from the doorway. "This is my problem, not yours." Preston looked up, his expression softening at the sight of her. "It became my problem when I decided to help you, Jane. I don't regret that decision. Even now, with Morton threatening you and your ranch, especially now." Preston rose and crossed to her, his movements still careful but stronger each day. "Morton is a bully who thinks money gives him the right to own people. Men like him need to be stood up to." Jane studied his face, the determination in his eyes, the set of his jaw. In the weeks she had known him, she had come to admire not just his kindness but his unwavering sense of justice. "Why did you really help me that night?" she asked, the question that had lingered in her mind. "Was it truly just because of your sister?" Preston was quiet for a moment, considering. "At first, yes," he admitted. "When I saw you in that store with that bruise on your face and the fear you were trying so hard to hide, I saw Emma. I couldn't fail another woman the way I failed her." He moved closer, close enough that Jane could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "But then I spoke with you, and I saw something else: courage. Dignity, despite everything. I didn't just want to save you from Morton. I wanted to give you the chance to become whatever you wanted to be." The sincerity in his voice made Jane's heart beat faster. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers gently touching his cheek. "And what if what I want to be is here? With you?" The words surprised them both. Jane started to pull her hand away, embarrassed by her boldness, but Preston caught it, holding it against his face. "Is that what you want, Jane?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "I didn't plan to feel this way," she confessed. "After everything with my mother, I told myself I would never depend on anyone again. But you made me feel safe, valued." Preston's free hand moved to her waist, drawing her closer. "I've been alone a long time," he said. "Building this ranch, looking after my men. I never thought I needed more until you came into my life." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question being asked and answered in the same breath. When they parted, Jane felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. "Morton will still come back," she said, practical despite the warmth spreading through her. "Let him," Preston replied. "We'll face him together." For 3 days, the ranch remained on high alert, with men taking turns standing watch. On the fourth day, Sheriff Reed rode up to the main house, his expression troubled. "Farley," he greeted Preston, tipping his hat to Jane. "Got some news you should hear." They settled in the parlor as the sheriff explained. "Morton's dead," he said bluntly. "Shot in a dispute at the Red Ace last night. Seems he and Harlan Jackson had a disagreement over some gambling markers." Jane gasped softly. "Jackson, the saloon owner who held my mother's debt?" Sheriff Reed nodded. "The very same. Story is Morton tried to sell Jackson your contract back at a loss, claiming you weren't worth the trouble. Jackson took offense, saying he'd been cheated. Words were exchanged, then bullets." "And Jackson?" Preston asked. "Wounded but alive." "He'll stand trial, but given that Morton drew first according to witnesses, he'll likely walk free." The sheriff turned to Jane. "Miss Willis, this concerns you directly. With Morton dead and Jackson facing legal troubles, any claim against you is effectively void. Your mother's debt died with Morton's purchase of your contract." Jane felt dizzy with relief. "So I'm truly free as any citizen of this territory," Sheriff Reed confirmed. "Though I'd advise staying clear of Presidio for a while. Jackson may be occupied, but he has friends who might remember your connection to this mess." After the sheriff departed, Jane and Preston sat in stunned silence. "It's over," Jane finally said, disbelief in her voice. Preston took her hand. "You can go anywhere now, do anything you choose." "What I choose," Jane said, meeting his gaze steadily, "is to stay, if you'll have me." Preston's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I was hoping you'd say that." The following months brought changes to Farley Ranch. Jane divided her time between helping Dr. Sanders in Presidio, carefully avoiding the Red Ace Saloon and its owner, and building a life with Preston. They were married in the fall, a simple ceremony attended by the ranch hands, Maria and Miguel, and a few trusted friends. Jane wrote to her mother in San Francisco, not expecting a reply but needing closure. To her surprise, a letter came 2 months later. Her mother was remarried to a shipping merchant and expressed regret, though not quite remorse, for her actions. "I never meant for you to suffer," Eliza Willis wrote. "I truly thought I would win enough to pay Jackson back before he came calling. Please forgive me, though I know I don't deserve it." Jane showed the letter to Preston as they sat before the fire in their home. "Will you forgive her?" he asked, no judgment in his tone. Jane considered the question carefully. "I already have," she realized. "Not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying anger would only give her power over me still." Preston pulled her close, his arm warm around her shoulders. "You're a remarkable woman, Jane Farley." "I had a remarkable teacher," she said, thinking of how Preston's words, "you're not responsible for her mistakes," had changed everything for her. "Someone who showed me that we aren't defined by others' actions, but by our own choices." Spring came again to the Texas borderlands, bringing with it new life. The ranch prospered under their joint care, and Jane's reputation as a healer grew throughout the county. When she discovered she was expecting their first child, the joy she felt was untainted by the shadows of the past. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, Preston placed his hand on Jane's growing belly. "What do you think of the name Jonathan for a boy?" he asked. "After your father," Jane smiled, covering his hand with hers. "Or Emma for a girl, after your sister." Preston's eyes grew misty. "I'd like that very much." "Do you ever regret it?" Jane asked suddenly. "Helping me that night, taking on my troubles." Preston looked at her as if the question was incomprehensible. "Regret finding the love of my life. Regret building this family." He shook his head, pulling her close. "Some actions change our course forever, Jane. Helping you that night was the best decision I ever made." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jane reflected on how far she had come from that terrified young woman in Morton's store. Her mother's mistakes had led her to the brink of despair, but they had also, in a roundabout way, led her to Preston. To love. To home. Life in the West was unpredictable and often harsh, but Jane faced it now with confidence and hope. She was no longer defined by her mother's sins or by what had been done to her. She was Jane Farley, wife, healer, soon-to-be mother, and mistress of Farley Ranch. Her own person, making her own choices, writing her own story. In November, as the first winter chill settled over the land, Jane gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Jonathan and Emma Farley came into the world strong and healthy, their cries echoing through the ranch house as Preston paced anxiously outside the bedroom door. "You can come in now," Dr. Sanders called, amusement in his voice. "Your wife has given you quite the surprise." Preston entered the room with reverent steps, his eyes widening at the sight of not one but two infants nestled against Jane's breast. "Twins," he whispered, sinking to his knees beside the bed. "Jane, they're beautiful. Would you like to hold your son?" Jane asked, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. With trembling hands, Preston took the small bundle, tears gathering in his eyes as his son's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. "Hello, Jonathan," he said softly. "I'm your father, Doctor." Sanders quietly excused himself, leaving the new family to their private joy. Preston settled carefully beside Jane on the bed, cradling their son while she held their daughter. "I never imagined this," Jane confessed, watching Preston's face as he gazed at their children. "2 years ago, I thought my life was over when those men came to claim me for my mother's debts. And now you're the heart of this family," Preston finished for her, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "The strongest person I've ever known." The twins flourished under their parents' devoted care. Jonathan had Preston's blue eyes and quiet temperament, while Emma inherited Jane's auburn hair and curious spirit. The ranch hands doted on them. Miguel and Maria became honorary grandparents, and even Dr. Sanders claimed a special relationship with the children he had helped bring into the world. As the twins' first birthday approached, Jane received another letter from her mother. This one contained surprising news: Eliza was returning to Texas, widowed once more but financially secure. She wished to see her grandchildren if Jane would permit it. "What will you do?" Preston asked when Jane showed him the letter. Jane looked out the window at their expanded home. Preston had added rooms to accommodate their growing family and Jane's small but thriving medical practice. "I'll invite her to visit," she decided. "The children deserve to know their grandmother, and perhaps she's changed." Preston nodded, supporting her decision, though concern lingered in his eyes. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." When Eliza Willis arrived in Presidio that spring, she was not the same woman who had abandoned her daughter years before. Time and perhaps remorse had softened her, turned her hair gray and lined her once beautiful face. She approached the ranch with visible trepidation, clearly expecting rejection. Instead, Jane met her at the gate with dignified grace, the twins watching curiously from Preston's arms on the porch. "Mother," Jane said simply. "Jane," Eliza replied, her voice catching. You look so well." "I am well," Jane confirmed. "Very well indeed." The reunion was awkward at first, heavy with unspoken recriminations and painful memories. But as the days passed, something like forgiveness began to take root. Eliza doted on her grandchildren, told Jane stories of her father that she'd never heard before, and gradually revealed the demons that had driven her to gamble away everything they had. "I was afraid," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, the children already asleep. "After your father died, I was terrified of failing you, of being poor. The cards seemed like a way out, a way to provide, but they became a trap instead." "You could have told me," Jane said softly. "We could have faced it together." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "I was too ashamed. And then it went too far, and Jackson threatened to take our shop, our home. When he suggested using you as collateral, I told myself I would win it all back before the debt came due. I never meant for you to pay for my mistakes." Preston, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "Yet she did pay, Mrs. Willis, in fear and pain and indignity." Eliza bowed her head. "I know there's nothing I can say to make that right." "No," Jane agreed, "there isn't, but we can move forward from here. You're the twins' grandmother. That means something to me, even if nothing else does." It was not perfect reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Eliza purchased a small house in town, close enough to visit regularly but maintaining the distance that Jane still needed. She proved to be a doting grandmother and, surprisingly, a help to Jane in her medical practice, having learned herb lore from her own mother years before. By the twins' second birthday, Farley Ranch had become the center of a thriving community. Preston's fair business practices and Jane's medical skills drew people from miles around. The bunkhouse expanded to accommodate more ranch hands, and a small school was established for the children of workers and neighboring farms. "Did you ever imagine this?" Jane asked Preston one evening as they watched a bonfire celebration to mark the end of a successful cattle drive. Around them, ranch hands and their families laughed and danced. The twins toddled under Maria's watchful eye, and even Eliza had found her place, telling fortunes with playing cards, her gambling days behind her, but her knowledge of the deck repurposed for innocent entertainment. "Not in my wildest dreams," Preston admitted, his arms secure around her waist. "I was resigned to being alone, building something to leave behind but having no one to leave it to." "And now," Jane prompted, leaning into his embrace. "Now I understand what true wealth is," he said, turning her to face him. "It's not in the land or the cattle or even the respect of other men. It's in the love we've found, the family we've made." As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one in the vast Texas sky, Jane reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the frightened young woman sold to cover her mother's debts to the confident wife, mother, and healer she had become, it was a transformation she could never have predicted. "You're thinking too hard," Preston murmured in her ear, pulling her into a slow dance as a fiddle player struck up a waltz. Jane laughed, allowing herself to be twirled under the stars. "I was thinking that your words changed my life." "Which words?" "You're not responsible for her mistakes," Jane quoted. "When you said that to me in Morton's store, it was like opening a door I didn't know existed. You gave me permission to believe in my own worth." Preston's eyes softened. "I only spoke the truth as I saw it." "You were the one brave enough to walk through that door." "We walked through it together," Jane corrected, rising on tiptoes to kiss him as the music swelled around them. Years passed, and the twins were joined by a brother, William, and later a sister, Sarah. Farley Ranch expanded, becoming one of the most respected cattle operations in West Texas. Jane's medical practice grew to include a small clinic where she trained other women in the healing arts, passing on both her father's scientific knowledge and the traditional remedies she learned from Maria and others. Presidio changed too, growing from a rugged border settlement into a proper town with a school, church, and thriving businesses. Harlan Jackson eventually sold the Red Ace Saloon and moved further west, taking with him the last tangible reminder of Jane's ordeal. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, Preston surprised Jane with a trip to San Francisco, the first real vacation they had taken since their marriage. With their children grown, or nearly so, the twins were away at college in Austin. William managed the ranch in their absence, and Sarah stayed with her grandmother Eliza. They were free to rediscover each other away from the responsibilities that had shaped their life together. Standing on a hill overlooking the magnificent bay, Preston wrapped his arms around Jane from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked simply. Jane leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid strength of him, older now, gray threading his dark hair, but still the man who had risked everything to rescue a woman he barely knew because it was the right thing to do. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Though I still miss the children," Preston chuckled. "They'll be grown and gone soon enough with families of their own. We raised them to be independent just as we've always been." "Not always," Jane reminded him, turning in his arms. "There was a time when I depended on you entirely. When you were my only hope. And look how quickly you found your footing," Preston said proudly. "Within months you were saving my life, establishing your practice, charming every hand on the ranch." Jane silenced him with a kiss, soft and sweet with the weight of 2 decades of love behind it. "We saved each other," she said when they parted. "That's the truth of it." That night, in their hotel room with the sounds of the city drifting through open windows, Jane and Preston reaffirmed the connection that had sustained them through years of joy and hardship. Their passion had matured like fine wine, deepened by shared experiences and absolute trust. Afterward, as they lay tangled in sheets and each other, Jane traced the scar on Preston's side, the bull's horn that had nearly taken him from her so early in their story. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met?" she asked. "If you hadn't come into the store that day." Preston caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I try not to think about it," he admitted. "The idea of a world where we didn't find each other, it's unimaginable to me now." "To me as well," Jane agreed. "Though sometimes I'm still amazed that you saw something worth saving in that frightened girl." "I saw everything," Preston said simply. "Everything I never knew I needed until that moment." Returning to Farley Ranch, they found their world expanded yet again. William had fallen in love with the new schoolteacher during their absence, and Sarah had discovered a passion for breeding horses that would eventually make the ranch as famous for its bloodstock as for its cattle. Life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. The twins returned from university with new ideas and ambitions, Jonathan to practice law and Emma to write for newspapers. Eliza, now in her 70s, had become a respected elder in the community, her past sins long forgotten as she dedicated herself to charitable works and the care of her great-grandchildren as they began to arrive. On Jane's 50th birthday, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch. Children, grandchildren, ranch hands who had become like family over the decades. As twilight fell, Preston led her to their special spot overlooking the valley, where he had proposed to her all those years ago. "I have something for you," he said, presenting her with a small wooden box beautifully carved with wildflowers. Jane opened it to find a locket containing miniature portraits of their 4 children. On the back was engraved a simple message: "You're not responsible for her mistakes, but I'm grateful every day that they led you to me." Tears filled Jane's eyes as Preston fastened the locket around her neck. "After all these years," she said, touching the precious gift, "you still remember those exact words." How could I forget? Preston asked, drawing her close. They were the beginning of us. As the stars emerged in the vast Texas sky, Jane Farley reflected on the long, winding path that had brought her to this moment. She had been sold to cover her mother's sin, but in that darkest hour, she had found a light that would guide her through the rest of her life, a cowboy who believed she deserved better, who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. You know, Preston said as they walked hand in hand back toward the celebration, I've been thinking about the ranch. Jonathan doesn't want it, and Emma's set on her writing career. William will run the cattle operation, and Sarah has her horses. What are you suggesting? Jane asked, though she suspected she knew where this was going. Preston's eyes twinkled in the gathering darkness. I was thinking it might be time to build that proper hospital you've always talked about, on the east section near town. The Farley Willis Medical Center has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Jane stopped in her tracks, overwhelmed by the gesture acknowledging both their legacies, their shared dream, in a way that would serve the community for generations to come. I think, she said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him tenderly, that you, Preston Farley, are still the best man I've ever known, and I fall in love with you a little more each day. Under a canopy of stars that had witnessed their entire journey together, they sealed this new promise with a kiss, not an ending, but another beginning in a story that had started with 7 simple words spoken in a general store decades before. You're not responsible for her mistakes. Words that had changed everything.